Hi, I'm Rob Cosman. Welcome to my shop, Hand Plane Adjustment. In this video, I'm going to show you something that a lot of folks have trouble with. How to set your chip breaker on the back of your blade, how to put your blade into your plane, how to adjust it so that you don't get plane tracks on either side. Difficult problem, but I'm going to show you some solutions. If you want to enjoy your hand planing, stay tuned for this. I'm Rob Cosman, and welcome to my shop. Now I'm going to go off the assumption that you already know how to sharpen. If you don't, or if you need some help or some pointers, go back to the first video I did on sharpening. I'll put a link down in the description down below and you can get some refresher on that. But here we go. First thing I'm going to do is put my chip breaker on the back of my blade. Now you want to make sure that that fits snugly at the front edge. In fact, if you'll notice, there's a lip on the back of your chip breaker. So when you put this, I'm going to take the screw out for a second. When that sets on there, if you were to hold it up to the light, you'll see a gap. It touches back here and it touches right up at the front. And originally that was there to provide extra support to a very thin blade. I don't think it's nearly as necessary today as some folks do, but it's still required because part of the adjustment of your plane works off of the chip breaker, so they have to be a part of the kit. Now, when you put that in, you want to make sure that it's nice and snug. And I put my chip breaker up to about a 32nd of an inch away from the edge. And I'm not a firm believer that that plays any great role. And I say that because there are bevel up planes that do not have chip breakers and they perform equally as well. So put that in there carefully and really snug that up. Now you want a good screwdriver for doing this. I have a screwdriver that doesn't have any taper on the tip. So when you put that in there, instead of it just applying pressure on the top edge, it bears all the way down and makes your screw head last a lot longer. All right, now before I put that in the blade, let me just explain a few of these things. This is called the frog, and your blade is going to sit in there. The back of the blade is going to lay flat on the frog. So you always want to just do a quick check and make sure there's no debris in there. You want good, solid, positive contact all the way through the plane so that you minimize any vibration that may occur when the iron starts to cut through the wood. This is called your lateral adjustment lever. And this is what you use to skew the blade to the left or to the right in order to get it parallel to the sole. And the reason why it's so critical to be parallel to the sole, if your blade is projecting higher on one side than the other, that means every time you take a pass on the edge of a board, you're going to throw it a little more out of square with each pass. So we'll talk about that extensively. But your lateral adjustment works. Your blade is going to pivot around this screw. So if your blade is sticking out higher on the right side, then you're going to push the lever toward the right side, and it'll swing it around like this, bringing the left side down, pulling the right side up. Now on these planes, there's a bearing right there. You'll feel it spin. And what's nice about that is when that bearing fits into the long slot on the back of the blade, instead of metal grinding on metal like some planes, that bearing just makes it a little bit smoother. And I'm also going to show you how I adjust that, but I'll wait until we put the blade in place. Now this thing right here is called your yoke. And that yoke connects to the adjuster knob down here. When you put your blade in, the yoke passes through the blade and engages this little rectangular slot in the chip breaker. Now this adjuster knob has a reverse thread on the rod. So when I spin in what you would see as a clockwise rotation, that is going to cause the blade to project out. And of course, retracting it or spinning it in a anti-clockwise is going to pull it back in for a lighter shaving. So when I put the blade in place, there's 3 points of contact. I want to make sure that the back of the blade is laying firmly on the face of the frog. I want to make sure the lateral adjustment bearing goes in that long slot, and I want to make sure that the yoke is fitting up into that little slot. And I usually just wiggle it around a little bit to make sure that everything is well seated. Now, just before I put that in place, this frog on this plane can be adjusted forward and back very conveniently from the back side with the blade in place. Now we're going to save that for another video on more advanced shape planing, but you need to know that because that can be play a major factor in improving the performance on the plane surface. So I've just spent time sharpening that blade, all of 32 seconds. I want to be careful. I don't want to bang it on anything, so I'm just going to drop it in there. I shouldn't say drop. Carefully place that in there, lay it down. just make sure that when you set it on there, it feels nice and firm. Now, a lot of folks want to know, well, how tight do you make this thing, which is called the lever cap or lever cap? Well, you want it tight enough that it will prevent the blade from moving accidentally. But you don't want it so tight that you can't make adjustments, and I'll show you how I do it. I'm going to put that in there, and then you just push down on that lever. Now, this has had a different thickness blade in it, so I've got to make an adjustment now, and I'm going to tighten this up. And this is another example of where you want a screwdriver with no taper, because you're working on a brass screw and you don't want to ruin that. So I've tightened it up a little bit, and then I come over here and I just operate the lateral adjustment lever. And you notice, by the way, when I do this, instead of just pushing it left or right, I actually squeeze it. When I do that, my thumb is pushing on the blade, helping it go in that direction, while my index finger is pulling on the lever, and it just smooths out and makes that a little more precise of an adjustment. That still is a little bit too light, so I'll give it a little snugging up. That's better. And the nice thing about this, you take it apart to sharpen it, take that out, put everything back in place, and it goes right back to that exact same spot, so you don't have to mess with that every time. But like I said, I had a thicker blade in there. All right. Now, just before I turn this over, this is designed to be a 3-finger tote or rear handle. So instead of trying to squeeze 4 fingers in there, which really is hard on the pinky, 3 fingers, index finger either lays up here. I like to keep it down underneath here. Just I can envision whacking into something and that hurts. So I tuck it in here, and I also use that or my middle finger to make adjustments on the fly, and I'll show you that as we get going too. Now, I'm going to try to get the cameraman to show you this, but up against a light colored background, wipe the sole clean. By the way, you only wipe one direction. Now I can see the blade. It's very prominent. It's sticking out there about 1/16 of an inch. So looking over my shoulder, as I sight down that sole, I'm going to move the blade, and you'll see how it moves left to right, like that. Mm-hmm. Okay, can you see how it moves? You picking up on that? Is it going left to right? Yes? Yeah. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do by eye is get that as close to parallel as possible. So I'm looking, and it looks pretty good. And then I'm going to start to retract it. So I'm spinning the adjuster knob in a counterclockwise rotation if I was looking at it from behind. And as that happens, the blade starts to retract. Now, as it gets closer and closer, it allows me to go in and make an even finer adjustment. And it's a lot easier to judge parallel when you're only looking at, 1/64 of an inch of blade versus 1/8 of an inch. And as I get that close, I'll make any finer adjustments I need to. And then I continue to retract. Now, just as I watch it disappear, unless it's really obvious that it's out of parallel, I'll just pull it all the way in so I know there's no blade exposed at all. Now, at this point, I'm ready to start planing. I'm going to use my wax to lubricate the sole. And this is the sole purpose of this is to reduce friction so that my effort is spent pushing the blade through the wood instead of pushing the plane over the wood. Just a long squiggly mark. That's all it takes. I really like this wax because it's hard enough that it leaves a very light film, but it's soft enough. Actually, it's soft enough it leaves a light film. It's hard enough that it doesn't cake up on there. All right, we'll set that there. Now I'm going to grab a nice piece of wood. We'll put that in the vise, and I'll show you how to get that blade just as close as possible to being perfectly parallel to the sole. Okay, blade fully retracted. Now while planing, and I usually do this with my middle finger or sometimes my index finger, but just start to slowly advance that blade by spinning the adjuster knob in a clockwise rotation. Watch for the first bit of shaving appears. Hopefully it will appear before the video's out. There. Okay, so if you look at this, getting a little bit over here, but it's primarily on the right side. So what I'm going to do is push the lateral adjustment lever. But instead of just pushing it, as I mentioned before, I'm going to squeeze the lateral adjustment lever between my index finger and my thumb. The index finger is going to be on the blade. It just helps move it, and it allows me to make a much finer adjustment. Just a little bit. Okay, so now I'm getting material all the way across, but it seems to be a little bit heavier. Now that's too fine of a shaving to really be able to tell, so I'll do another one, clear all that out. And a little more projection, meaning I spun the adjuster knob a little bit. That still seems to be heavier on the right, so a little bit more. Now, I don't know if you can tell, but from my perspective, that's peeling off a little bit to the right, which means it's a little bit heavy still on the left. So I went a little bit too far, so I'm going to come back by doing the opposite. Not much. Sometimes it's just a matter of being able to feel that it's moved. Let's try this again. Now, I went a little bit heavy on this one, but well, now it's going the opposite way, so I'll go in and just do a slight adjustment. All right, I'm going to retract the blade just a little bit, make that shaving a little bit thinner. Don't get irritated. You just have to work with it. Now, I'm also going to check this again to make sure I've got this as tight as I want. No, that is. Heavy on the right. Okay, so that's coming out and it's pretty much staying perfectly in line with the plane. So at that point, it's a pretty good guess to say the blade is projecting even or parallel to the sole. Love that stuff. Now, if you're having problems with this, leave a comment in there and we'll try to address it. If you like what you saw, don't forget to like it. Share it. I'm sure somebody else could benefit from it if you did. And if you haven't subscribed, subscribe. We try to put out 2 videos a week. So subscribe, and if you hit that notification bell, that will alert you whenever we release a new one. You got to get into this. Get yourself a decent plane, good sharpening gear, learn how to sharpen. You start doing this, you'll never touch another piece of sandpaper again, and it is so relaxing. Hope this helps.